Aloha, everybody. My name is Kaliko Castile. I am the co-founder of Thunderstorm Strategies, president at the Minority Cannabis Business Association, as well as host of this podcast, the CannabisCMO, which is your go-to source for insights and strategies for marketing in the cannabis industry. Whether you're a brand, an agency, or professional working in the industry, our goal is to help you navigate the unique challenges as well as the opportunities of marketing cannabis products and services. Each week, we're going to bring to you expert guests, industry news, and actionable tips like branding, social media, content marketing, and more. So if you want to stay ahead of the curve and grow your business in the cannabis space, make sure you're following along by subscribing to our weekly newsletter at CannabisCMO.substack.com, as well as follow our page on LinkedIn and subscribe to CannabisCMO on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Now let's get into today's show. I'm super excited to have today's guest on the show, George Jage from Jage Media Inc., as well as MJUnpacked. Super excited to talk to him. He's been in the industry since 2014, is well known and universally respected. Now producing a really exciting cannabis event called MJUnpacked. It's actually coming up later in this month in New York City in April. I'll be there and looking forward to meeting a lot of people on the ground. Just a little bit about George's background. He's an award-winning event producer and media executive with nearly 3 decades experience. He started in the 90s for the off-price in the Off-Price show from 1993 to 2001, then the World Tea Media from 2002 to 2014, where he eventually joined MJBiz Daily as the president in 2014 and helped lead the organization in their growth from 20 tabletops to 100,000 square feet of exhibit space at the Las Vegas Convention Center by 2017. He also worked at Dope Media, where he helped lead the acquisition by High Times Holding Company in 2018, and eventually went on to start Jage Media, and then, like I said, now MJUnpacked, which I'm really excited to talk about later today. George, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Really excited to chat with you, man. Welcome.
Kaliko, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get right into it. I know in this sort of background, we talked about sort of your experience coming from mainstream trade shows into the cannabis trade show. First, want to sort of just talk about what was that experience like coming from a mainstream show where you really helped grow it to now starting in a nascent industry where, as your bio says, it started way before you started with just 20 tabletops at a trade show.
Yeah, I think, part of it is I've always kind of been a little bit of a serial entrepreneur. I think even going back to my herbal distribution days when I was in college, which also obviously had a relationship with the plant. And when I left school, my dad needed some help. He had an off-price apparel business, and he was facing some serious business challenges. So I kind of stepped in advance of going and getting another drug dealing job in the pharmaceutical industries, and we ended up starting a trade show for the off-price apparel industry. And it was one of those things that it was necessity was a mother of invention, and all of the off-price guys weren't welcome in the big manufacturer show. So we started our own event and launched it at the Debbie Reynolds Hotel, Casino, and Movie Museum in Las Vegas, with 20 exhibiting companies as well. And we're able to grow that show very successfully and sell it to a publicly traded company in London. It was one of their first major acquisitions in the U.S. They just got gobbled up by a bigger fish in the trade show space, I think for close to $1 billion. But it's just, I've always kind of just fell in love with trade shows. I mean, this is really, what drives commerce and, the challenges and, kind of logistical stuff. My kind of a right brain person, and kind of math and science, and my business partner and wife and life partner, Kim's more of the creative empath that really, understands kind of emotion and design and really kind of, compassionately being able to market our event. But it just was a really great experience. But it's like, just looking at going from and being able to operate in a couple of different industries that, have different positions in the supply chain, I think gave me a really great skill set. And honestly, when I came in and, entered the cannabis space in 2014, albeit I was going to take over somebody else's business and grow it, and there was very little infrastructure and only one full-time employee. This is I really feel like this is exactly where I was meant to be. And, that business, as you mentioned, I mean, I was able to grow that company very successfully. It was the fastest growing trade show in the entire United States when I ran it. There was some differences and some issues with the ownership of that company that we needed to resolve legally, and I exited the business and was a little bit sad about that. I was really proud of what we built there, but once the door closes, another one opens up. I really enjoyed my time working with the team at Dope Magazine. Great brand, some of the probably most authentic people I've met in the industry. Most people in the world know Dave Tran. He's hard to miss, and a good friend. I think that media is really tough in the cannabis space. It's competitive. It's very bifurcated. Consumer media especially has been very challenging, and Dope kind of being a consumer-facing publication, had a lot of challenges. So when I was brought in, it was really I think trying to balance the needs of the investors, the founders, the staff, the customers, the advertisers, and there wasn't really a good solution without kind of pouring a bunch more money into the company versus maybe selling this and having it be recapitalized. We did have it sold to somebody else that tried to retrade us. As you know, the cannabis industry can be a little bit challenging at times. And we ended up selling it to High Times. I wish that would have been a different ending because they more or less kind of smothered the Dope brand. And it was based on High Times being able to go public, which I think he's 3 or 4 years behind filing any SEC filings at this point.
Yeah,
I'm calling him like it is, like I see him today.
I appreciate that, man. I definitely, I remember that sort of situation as somebody who was there when Dave and the team came from Washington, where they started down into Oregon as its second market.
Yeah.
The dispensary I was running at the time, Brightside, was one of their co-ops of the month early on, sort of in their journey. So it was cool to watch sort of that Dope machine be built up over time. And then obviously it was a celebrated sort of thing at the time. But as you mentioned, the cannabis industry is fickle, and things do not always work out as we had planned and sometimes had hoped. Yeah.
And I think it's part of also just the life cycle and the maturity of the market. And this is kind of segueing about what we're doing now. I've just seen the industry, and I think people, it is very intense and complicated, and it's sometimes hard to maybe pick your head up and look beyond the trees and see what's coming next. But back in like 2014 to 2017, people were just getting licensed in Oregon and Washington and Colorado, and Nevada was around the corner. California was obviously active, and they needed to stand up a retail store. They needed fixtures. They needed POS systems. They needed, bud tender training, all sorts of stuff. If they were doing a manufacturing and cultivation, they needed a lot of equipment. And that was really the needs of the market of the moment, really up until about 2017 when I left MJBiz. And then we kind of went on this kind of frontiersmanship type approach where you saw the rise of the MSO, the Canadian Stock Exchange, was open for business. People were able to get that kind of pink sheet listings or the OTCBB listings in the US and have a duly traded stock, that kind of created these MSOs. And everybody was going to these new markets and, to Michigan or to Illinois or, Maine or Rhode Island or wherever they could to go and kind of acquire these licenses and start building this footprint with the anticipation that we were moving towards federal legalization at some point, and that these kind of artificial boat anchors that continue to hang around our neck, which includes the lack of access to banking, would be resolved. Unfortunately, we're still kind of stuck in that quagmire. But, after that kind of expansionism period, I think that we've really kind of entered what I consider the golden age of the brand. And this is really the end game, I think, of and kind of where the puck is going. As I think you and I talked about Wayne Gretzky making that comment. This is going to be a consumer packaged goods industry. There are other channels that cannabis is going to be very valuable in the pharmaceutical space, in the medical space, and the alternative, certainly naturopath and medical space, and certainly in the therapeutic space. That we've already seen them, cannabis being used to help people with PTSD and other things. I think that psychedelics probably have a more promising opportunity for that, but cannabis can certainly be a bridge to that. But primarily, we are going to be a consumer packaged goods industry, and the end game from a trade show standpoint is going to be focused around brands and retailers. It's not going to basically be light bulbs and label makers, where there really isn't a return on objective for the people that are investing and spending money to set up at a show that the retailers and brands aren't going to. They control the top of the funnel for the supply chain spending.
That's a really I wouldn't say just interesting, but really a fascinating point about sort of cannabis being a CPG industry. But a lot of folks, I think, in general, think about cannabis as a commodity, right? Sort of as an agricultural commodity, which has led to sort of driving the price down. But then I think thinking about it through the CPG lens actually raises the floor back up for the value of what you can actually sell to somebody. Because if you
Sure.
think about it as a CPG brand, then the same product becomes more valuable based on the way you're actually marketing it or providing some unique value to the commodity itself. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I got probably some really unique thoughts on that because when I started the World Tea Expo, I knew nothing about tea. We had exited the business that I built in Milwaukee with my father. I moved to Las Vegas. I started 3 other companies, and somebody came up to me and said, "Is there a trade show for the tea industry?" And I said, "I don't know." And I started looking at it. It just kind of stuck in my head, and I saw it as an opportunity to kind of swim in a blue ocean space. I don't like to go and compete, and be redundant in what is being offered already. I think if you don't have something unique, it's just that much harder to gain market share. But we started the show. I mean, I went to the Tea Association in the United States and I said, "Hey, we want to start a trade show for the tea industry. We'd like you to help, be a sponsor and help us get some of these companies to participate." And their response to me was, "We'll help you, but we don't really think it's going to work." And that was a little bit deflating for me. I flew out to New York, met this guy I've never met before, and what we soon realized is like our show wasn't for the Liptons and the Tetleys. It was for all the independent operators out in the space, the specialty tea market. And that's what we really help drive and thrive to grow and that's where innovation happens. Bigger companies, when this becomes federally legal, really successful brands will get acquired. And then, it's like Coca-Cola bought Honesty, and probably increase their sales distribution by like 20 or 30x. Because Coca-Cola has a big distribution network. Tazo Tea was sold to Starbucks. It was for a couple $1 million, and within 5 years, it was $1 billion brand with a half a billion being sold at FDM and $500 million being sold at the Starbucks retail outlets. Right. So I think that the opportunities to leverage and expand brands and really accelerate them globally is a function of larger kind of CPG conglomerates, but innovation and real product invention, that happens at the entrepreneurial level. And I think that the independent operators in this space are so underrepresented right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I feel like I just got back from NECAN, a regional event up in the New England area, and went to the Boston show. And there's a lot of content in that show about how people are dealing with sort of the saturation of the marketplace only 5 years into legalization right out there. And they're talking about $6 a gram, prices, things that I think Oregon and the West Coast have sort of already gone through that cycle. But it's interesting to sort of see that and the independent retailers really trying to find their way. Go ahead.
Yeah. And actually I apologize. I kind of got lost when I was going back to that kind of origin story for the World Tea Expo. But one of the things that we saw when we really started understanding the market dynamics in tea is that tea is a global commodity. And so the tea that's sold is usually sold at auction in India, Sri Lanka, Kenya, a lot of the tea producing states, Japan, China, Taiwan are all producers of tea, some of the most beautiful places in the world. But the tea sold at auctions usually like it's kind of kept artificially at around $1.60 to $2 a kilo. Now, a kilo of tea can make over 200 cups of tea, and if they're buying it for $2, you can do the math. It's costing them about a penny to make, put the tea in a tea bag. And especially if it's low quality tea that's typically, it's graded based on being full leaf all the way down to fannings, which is like tea dust, right? So we used to joke that was the stuff swept off the shop floor. But, it's because there was always this 2 or 3% oversupply in the tea industry that the tea farmers could never be able to sustain price integrity. And the big conglomerates would go in and say that tea that was selling for $1.60 at auction in India went up to $1.80. They would just reformulate and go and buy $1.60 a kilo tea in another country and kind of remix their formula so it tasted consistent. Like the people that did that was a fascinating process. They literally would be slurping teas, like 400 or 500 different types of teas, taking notes on them and then using that data to formulate so Lipton always tastes like Lipton. And it's a pretty fascinating process how they do that. But it's really that specialty market that I think is so important, and the independent operator that's critical for any economy.
Well, can you like kind of introduce for folks who maybe haven't heard of MJ Unpacked yet? Can you introduce the show and sort of the concept of what you're trying to do and how that dovetails into what we're talking about with the CPG industry and how brands themselves can start to actually set themselves apart?
Sure. Love to, of course. Thank you. I mean, I think the first thing is that, our fundamental, thesis is that cannabis is this consumer packaged goods industry, and that the end game for trade shows is going to be focused on brands and retailers like the bar and nightclub show and the fancy foods and the natural products expo. And we also kind of saw that so many of these brands and retailers, didn't really have their needs met at any of the existing national shows. And they, quite frankly, weren't even attending them, which is ironic because all of the exhibitors at those shows are expecting to meet brands and retailers and cultivators, because they're really controlling the purse strings of everything that trickles down the supply chain. So if a cultivator needs to build a new facility, that's where those dollars come from to support the participation and the return on investment for anybody exhibiting at those events. We started the company back in 2019. We started kind of honing up the business plan. I went through the Canopy Boulder Accelerator. Patrick Ray's been a good friend for a long time, and he actually worked at the Natural Products Expo. So he understood what we were doing and why. And quite frankly, it was very encouraging for us to do this because I wasn't sure if I, had the mettle in my 50s to go and start a company from the ground up, because it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of hours and a lot of different things that you need to put your hands around. But we started the company. We got funded in February of 2020, which completely sucked because in March we were unable to do live events. We went out and we did a series of virtual events. We did them, I think, better, faster, and more frequently than anybody else in the space, but they just suck. I'm just gonna be honest, they suck. You just don't have that same type of ability to create some foundational relationship and foundational trust that's going to lead to a business transaction in a virtual event environment. Like, we had the ability that people could take their picture with their iPhone and we would put your picture in your booth. So there's Kaliko standing in your booth, and I could click Kaliko and start chatting with you in a private chat room. But that's just not the same, right? I want to be able to, give you a high five and pass the Dutchie.
It was really interesting getting through that pandemic period, right? Where you had the entire industry was dependent on this sling of trade shows to do business. And then we just had to cut it off, right? And then whether you were an event producer with a bunch of money on the line that suddenly like you were having to cash in on insurance policies or figure out, what the hell you were going to do, or whether you were a business development rep who was used to getting their leads through that sort of industry trade show circuit, it was really interesting and fascinating to see sort of like, how do we pivot to still give people the opportunity to do business, to make connections? Sure. But as you said, it wasn't quite the same.
It was definitely challenging. I mean, and it was a lot, but it was like, I just remember like we did our first one, I think in June of 2020. And it's like, okay, we're doing all this work leading up to the event, getting everybody's booths organized, organizing the speaker sessions, have this huge visual interactive, display that we had a third party that was developing for us. And it was the day of the show, and I'm down in my office, like the same office right here. And all right, let's open the doors. And I see people, like, you can see the number of people in the room, but it's like just the eeriness of how quiet it was, right? Like it was depressing that you just like, it's about creating energy. Like, I appreciate you saying, trade show organizer, but I think I'm actually going to define myself as a circus ringmaster, because it's really about bringing people into the tent and blowing their hair back and making them have a wonderful experience, feel that they, got value for the money that they spent. So they're getting a return on their investment or return on their objectives, but it's that return on experience. You can only really do it in an in-person event, face-to-face marketing.
Yeah, no doubt. And one of the things that when I've been able to go to the first few MJ Unpacks, and one of the things that I really liked about it, and I would love if you could talk about it a little bit, is what's different from just initially you walk into the show floor, different from MJ Unpacked to other ones, is you have these really awesome brand showcases that are on the show floor that are all glass. They're branded with people's brands on the top and bottom and sort of throughout. And then they have their actual branded products sort of merchandised on these shelves. Can you explain a little bit more about sort of the idea behind that and exactly sort of what experience it is that you're going for at MJ Unpacked?
Yeah, I mean, we probably over-engineer everything that we do, but we wanted to come out of the gate bold. We didn't want to come in meek, and I didn't need nobody needs another pipe and drape trade show that they're charging $5,000 for the space. So, we took some time to really understand what our customer need sets were. And again, asking a brand to come from Washington or come from, Illinois and exhibit at a show in Las Vegas or New York, where they can't technically sell those retailers there, is not the value proposition. So we knew that, asking them to spend $5,000 on a booth, or I think MJBiz is like $7,000 now, and that's just bare space. You got to spend another, $5,000 to $10,000 building a booth, setting it up, staffing it. You got your meals and entertainment expense, which is going to happen no matter what event you do. So we wanted to design a better product, and there's a lot of inefficiency in the trade show model that just doesn't need to be there. So the brand showcases, we said, let's find a price point that is affordable for a brand to come to our show, display their products, and then create an untethered event experience for them so they're not stuck in a booth. And we talk to people like, what do you like about shows? What don't you like? And they don't want to be stuck in a booth the whole time, right? So we designed a lot of soft seating around our event so people had places they could go sit down and have those conversations that lead to deal flow and lead to transactional success. So we had huge lounge areas. We had, I think you saw our 20-foot foosball table. We had bars open. I think one of my investors' sons has a knockdown video game business. We had video games there. We had our money stage. We had our main stage. We had our meeting space that was on the show floor for people to sit down and have conversations. And just, again, creating those different types of experiences that people aren't going to see at everyday shows. But the brand showcases go into that. So, for $2,500, you got a complete key brand showcase. And we tech enable that. So anybody who's going and scans your QR code on your showcase, it's going to lead capture for you. People can schedule meetings with you. So you can say, hey, meet me at your showcase at 2:30. I'd like to meet with you. So we can create that type of lead generation and opportunity for them, but do it in a different way. So what the coolest thing about that, though, Kaliko, is that, so few of the brands ever have a chance to really kind of control their own visual merchandising. And you've seen how kind of crazy some people go dressing these showcases up and decoring them. But that's what brand is. Like, they need to be able to tell their authentic story, right? And so, the Cheech and Chong brand that had it in there, they had it was like a mannequin with a Cheech mustache. It's just iconic. And you knew it was Cheech just from the mustache, right? But you can kind of create that storytelling in these showcases and still have the opportunity to display at a show at a fraction of the cost. And, and then you get a kind of free to move around, explore what's going on. And there's no other event that has brands from across the country on their show floor that really kind of highlight, the depth and breadth of the market.
I do think that's cool, even though you've bounced around a couple of different cities, New York, Vegas. I know there's probably some other cities on the map coming, but it is cool to have sort of a show that is a national show that people can come and display the brands. Because I think there's a lot of people, especially in this game, there's been a lot of stories about in New York, people who are trying to license brands into New York, even though they can't actually grow and get licensed in New York. There's an opportunity for brands to get out there. So I think it's really interesting for people who are in some other marketplaces that they can get in front of other people from other marketplaces, potentially strike some sort of licensing or brand deal and expand their footprint.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, being adaptive and understanding the needs of the market at the moment. I mean, for a brand to expand beyond their state footprint, I mean, the cost structure of setting up an entirely new operation, getting a license that could cost you, $1 million to $10 million, having a completely different set of regulatory measures that you have to be compliant with. It's just, doing brand licensing deals is always going to be a much cheaper path to success. Now, if I own a license in the market, if I become a white labeler and just contract manufacture other people's product, I'm going to benefit from the overall success of the market without taking the risk on the brands, right? So there's an economic benefit to kind of motivate people to want to do contract licensing deals. And again, it gives brands the opportunity to have a multi-state presence. I think the biggest challenge there is always going to be consistency. And I think, there's certain products that, are using wrong, depending on how they're using the wrong ingredients. If you're doing pre-rolls, you obviously are going to be subject to the different types of flowers and strains and cultivation practices that are available in that market to create that finished product. And probably it's very difficult to kind of make sure that joint pre-roll you smoke in Massachusetts is going to have the same, exact kind of experience as you're going to have in Missouri. But if you're just pulling in, the THC molecule as an ingredient into a gummy or a mint, If you are, kind of controlling what terpenes, or if it's live resin, it might be a little bit harder again. But I think it's that product consistency. But when we see the walls fall down, so to speak, and I, was talking with some of the leadership over at the Office of Cannabis Management in New York recently, and part of the reason that they're creating these true party of interest on the retailers, because at some point the walls are going to fall down, and when that happens, there's going to be a race to create operational efficiency, consolidate, manufacturing into, regionally in these states, and create some cost efficiency in that process, right? And that can be passed on to the consumer eventually. Hopefully not where everybody's losing money like they are now and being overtaxed, but protecting the retailers is key to their strategy, right? So that those retail license holders aren't going to get, washed out of the market if there is interstate commerce or federal legalization.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see as things open up how things are going to play out. But I think, your underlying point throughout this whole thing about it shifting into a CPG industry is super interesting, especially as these things open up. And, as you said, there's regulators who are trying to do their best to protect in-state operators, while still trying to allow for, sort of the expansion of the overall marketplace. I'm kind of curious, you talk a lot about meeting the needs of the marketplace. As you guys are thinking about not only the experience that you create for exhibitors or sort of how you're helping people make connections, when you're thinking about creating content for the show or thinking about the things that brands need to be thinking about or talking about, that sort of stuff, what are some things that are bubbling up? Maybe can you preview some of the stuff you guys are going to talk about in New York, specifically around what brands need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the earlier sessions on the main day is like, oh shit, don't do that, right? And I think that depends on the needs of the market at the moment. In New York, I mean, we have a lot of new licenses coming online. New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland. I mean, the entire Pacific or the entire Northeast. So I think being able to bring some of that experiential knowledge from operators that have walked a mile in their shoes before they get to those mistakes or those challenges that they're going to have to face is really critically important. We also have a lot of conversation in and around legacy and making sure that legacy has a seat at the table. And I think fundamentally this kind of even goes back to, one of the key things that when you asked about our show is that fundamentally the industry deserves a better event that's stewarded more responsibly. Like, this is not for us. It's never going to be, how do we sell another booth? How do we sell another ticket? We have, investors, and we've got a business, and we need to keep the lights on like everybody else. But our goal at the end of the day is, how do we make sure that underrepresented voices, people that don't have access to the market the way other people do, have a fair shake at it? And I think trade shows are a great equalizer that way, because it doesn't matter if you're in a 10 by 10 or a 10 by 40. You have the same equal access to the people that are attending that show to tell your story. And so we want to make sure that that opportunity is out there for everybody in the industry. We want to make sure legacy has a seat at the table. We want to make sure that, social equity and, socially impacted, groups of people that have been marginalized by the war on drugs have a foothold at our event as well. And we've done that very successfully. MCBA has been a great partner, and, we're working with our academy, and we're going to, we raise the money to support their participation to have BIPOC and social equity brands on the show floor. We also have, our academy is also working with the OCM as a accelerator for all their cardholders. So they're all going to be at our event in mass, or at least we expect probably about 90% of them, including the newest licensees that just got announced yesterday.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I definitely appreciate all the work that you guys have done, making sure that your event is inclusive and that you guys are doing stuff to find underwriters and great sponsors who are, underwriting people to be able to come to the show. As you mentioned, our academy has done a great job at all these MJUnpacked events. And I did happen to tune into the live stream in New York yesterday where they announced 99 new licenses. And then obviously, as you said, working directly with our academy to build out the accelerator program. So it's really awesome to see these other groups come online and really help these entrepreneurs get on their feet, right? I think it's one thing for us to all talk about sort of the need for equitable policies and equitable outcomes. It's another thing to actually provide those pathways. So definitely good on MJ.
And that's important. I mean, the conversation has to start somewhere. And I think, when we were doing our virtual events, obviously, diversity, inclusion, equity was really important. It has been for, since day one in this industry. And I think we all realize we have an opportunity to build a better world or a better market or a better industry. It's just, having those sessions and going through the same shit, talking about the same fact that we still have the same problem doesn't change the narrative, right? So we've always focused in saying, how do we put the rubber to the road? And this is what we think is working for us. Like it's not just, hey, let's give, one or two, social equity companies a booth. We want to continue to expand this program. We want to have, hundreds of social equity or BIPOC owned businesses at the show. We want to make sure that we can change the narrative. Now, we also want to be very mayoral. Like, this is the idea of creating an open market. Like, this is, trading camels before Christ. This is the basis of commerce. So we don't want to influence the marketplace and skew it in favor of one person or another. We want people to have equal access to the market. But we do realize that we have an opportunity to influence that. And this is probably the length that we'll go, because we know that this is a critical issue for the industry. It's important to my wife, to myself, everybody else on our team. And if we can make a difference, then we win. Like, that's the stuff we get to take with us at the end of the day. It's not anything that's in our bank account.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll definitely give you your props and your flowers for even when you were back at MJBiz, always focusing on advocacy and writing donation checks to nonprofit organizations. I remember NCIA being a beneficiary of some of those funds, MCBA. So, I know that your heart's always been in the right place, and that you are a steward of the industry as much as you are somebody who's helping people make money, right? So definitely I've always appreciated that. That's been in your ethos.
Yeah. And it's not always all about the money. I mean, yes. I mean, I had a long talk with my daughter. She went on a walk with the dog with me, and I was explaining to her the difference between the ideals of capitalism, socialism, communism, and everything else. And it's, we live in a capital market, so it's driven on creating this success. And it's just kind of also hearing this really great, piece on NPR about this, Filipino philosophical thing about everybody has a debt to their community when they're born, that they have to pay. And if they've got abundance and their neighbor doesn't, then they need to share that with them. And they support their community in a holistic and grassroots way, versus this kind of rugged individualism of America, that you need to be a self-made man and your worth is going to be tied to your bank account. That's bullshit. And, I guess I think that your worth is how much impact have you had positive impact have you had on the world around you, right? Like, can you make that change? And kind of leave the world a little bit better place than when we started. And I scared shitless about that. I've got, teenage kids. I think every parent worries about the world. And I know you're a new dad. How's that treating you?
Doing well, man. And actually I was gonna take a chance to ask you, like, one of the things I'm exploring right now is being a professional with grand ambitions while having, a family that I'm growing and a little one at home that, requires my attention. How have you handled that as sort of a professional, sort of at the highest levels of this industry and others while growing a family? How have you sort of navigated that?
It's a balance. I mean, when we were running World Tea Media and our son was being born, Caden, my wife and I were running the business. We were a small business like we are now. So we kind of did this thing after he was born and she had a little time to rest, that we would take turns going to the office. And whoever went to the office, as soon as that person came home, the person who was watching the child for the entire day is like, here, I need a break. It's a lot, especially that first couple of months, man. Ouch. We ended up hiring a nanny, Zilda, this Portuguese woman who was wonderful. She was very much a part of our family. I think that we've done a semi-decent job trying to balance our professional and personal lives. But it's hard in cannabis because it is so demanding, right? I mean, there's days where I come back to my computer after dinner and I'm like, oh, it's 11 o'clock and I could probably work for another 6 hours and not even come close to being caught up.
Absolutely.
So it's tough. I think one of the funniest things was when my son went to his third grade teacher and they asked what their parents do for a living. And he told his teacher that his dad's job is to sell marijuana.
That's one of those kids say the darndest things moments for sure.
So I called up his teacher and I'm like, Mrs. Lake was her name. And I said, Mrs. Lake, I said, I understand you are asking the kids what they do and their parents do. And my son mentioned that I sell marijuana. And I just want to clarify that I don't sell marijuana. I help people who sell marijuana sell more marijuana, but I don't sell it myself.
You're a multiplier, a megaphone.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's hilarious.
but it is challenging. And, but I think, a little shout out to Betty Aldworth, formerly from Students from Sensible Drug Policy, a force in this industry. She's with the MAPS organization now, working on psychedelics. But she was the one who came to me like after I did the first show for MJ Biz and said, George, this is the best show the industry's ever seen. But by the way, we're never going to participate again. And I said, excuse me? Like, I said, what do you mean? And she goes, you're not doing anything to support the advocacy groups in the industry. I said, oh, that's a really good point. Can I fix it? And she said, sure. So it did take me about 6 months to explain to the ownership of MJ Biz why we needed to do this and why it was important that we take a leadership role in that. But eventually I wore them down, and we were able to have several, industry events that you mentioned that, we raised money and donated some of the proceeds from the event to support these groups. And, MCBA and NCIA, SSDP, MPP, DPA, Attach, USCC. We can go on and on of the alphabet soup of organizations that are out there. And it's a really tough time for, organizations like MCBA, I'm sure, and others that, to be able to maintain your membership because, bean counters all over the world, as soon as there's an economic downturn, start saying, let's get rid of association memberships, any charitable contributions, let's get rid of travel expense, marketing spend. And if I could just teach these people, when you take your any of your Series 7 tests or whatever it takes for you to become a CFO for a company, learn marketing. If you shut off your marketing funnel, you're going to shut off your sales funnel.
It's something we talked about in a previous episode on CannabisCMO, but it is very much that point that, like, as we're going through this tightening, people are cutting down and firing marketing staff and then wondering why they're not hitting their sales numbers and then wondering overall why they're not growing. But yeah, I think it's a key point that's often one of the first things for people to chop when it's literally the lifeblood or the ability for sales to get out there and to generate leads.
I mean, I've talked to some big companies and they tell me that they've cut indiscriminately 75% of their marketing staff. I mean, I think that, you do need to tighten the belt. This is a tough time because of the capital crisis and the lack thereof of access to capital. I am seeing some new solutions coming into the space. My friend, took over as vice president of treasury at Credit Union One and called me up and he's like, help me understand the market. And that, they're a $2 billion credit union. Credit unions have never failed. Banks have. He's like, well, we want to bank the cannabis industry and we don't want to charge them any fees. I said, people are going to love you.
That's a good deal.
The cost for them to maintain a bank account is like $181. But the solution that people have had up to this point have primarily been kind of some third-party solution, and I don't mean to disrespect the service that those companies have done in the market, but you're adding another layer of cost that ultimately the independent operator has to bear. It's paying the premium on the rent. It's, paying premiums on your insurance and then getting denied coverage when you have to make a claim because you got robbed or somebody got shot in your store. This type of stuff is solvable problems, but I think we, because we're kind of bifurcated and we all live in these little, kind of glass bubbles inside our own state market, we forget that we do have a national movement here. And if not an international movement, that we can, significantly affect change if we unify the voices of the independent operators in the space.
Well, going down that same sort of path about thinking about independent operators, thinking about sort of the constricting of the marketplace, thinking about sort of people being really focused on how they're spending their dollars. What sort of advice do you have for sort of entrepreneurs who are struggling to stay afloat or really differentiate themselves from larger, more capitalized players in this space?
Yeah. I think there's always great case studies. I think it's, you got to be inventive and listen, I mean, Kaliko, you're a sharp guy. I've seen some of the things you've done. Heck, you ran for office. You are marketing yourself and packaging yourself at that point. So, I got a lot of respect for that, but I think you need to be inventive. I brought Peter Van Stoke, the founder of Jones Soda, to speak at the World Tea Expo years ago. And this was when they were just starting out. And what he did, because he couldn't crack into that distribution channel that Coke and Pepsi have inside these state markets, he hired people to drive around in windowless vans wearing orange prison jumpsuits and going and delivering their soda to retailers and created a huge, kind of PR around this. Gary Vaynerchuk came to my Tea Expo and And he at the time he had the wine library, and he's like, I should keynote your next event. And I'm like, I didn't know who you were at the time, but now I probably should have, in retrospect, taken him up on that offer. And he's become quite successful and really kind of, providing some really unique perspectives on how to market products. It's you gotta weather the storm. I think that the biggest thing that I could offer advice, especially independent operators, is build your peer-to-peer network. And I know that this might sound self-serving, but I mean, we're trying to create an event that drives value that can help people out. And when we said before what we're doing for being inclusive, we're also exclusive in the sense that only licensed operators with title manager hire or accredited investors actively investing in cannabis can attend our show, because we want to create the highest value proposition for everybody who's in the room, so that everybody you're talking to is a decision maker or is somebody who has walked a mile in your shoes. Not being, listening to somebody, that's a consultant tell you how you should run your business is a little bit challenging for cannabis because it is so unique. And unless somebody's got some real world experience, it's very difficult for them to be able to be a resource to help you solve problems that you don't know you have yet or that you come across in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. This is such a unique industry. And one of the things we've talked about on a previous episode as well was the idea that, like, unless you're actually getting on the ground, talking to your prospective customers, understanding what it is they want, to the same thing that you're doing, understand the needs of the marketplace now, and doing that, whether you're an edible company, extract company, flower, retailer, really trying to understand who it is your target customer is, but not just like on paper, understand who they are, like actually go talk to them, right? And actually start to understand what it is that they're looking for that will help inform how you're selling things to them and how you're building out your supply chain and all of the ways in which you can actually be connecting with your target audience.
Yeah. And then how are you controlling that feedback loop to make sure that gets worked back into your product development and product improvement plans, or business improvement plans, right? I mean, like, there's not a rule book out there for what we're doing. And that makes it exciting. I think, one of the things that attracted me to the cannabis industry is that, when I've done some personal inventory, I realized that my childhood trained me to be very good at navigating chaos, and maybe even at times creating it. And I think that's probably a similar attribute for a lot of people in the space. Like, you have to be able to roll with a lot of punches in this space, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of challenges. So, I think, the most important thing is, is rely on your community. Like, if you're trying to do this all by yourself, you think you know all the answers. I dealt with this when I used to be an assistant brewmaster, that the brewmasters all thought they were the only ones who knew how to make good beer. We've seen that in the cultivation side of the business. I think there's a lot more humility these days of people realizing that there's a lot of talent out there. Build that network, learn something new from somebody else, have somebody that you can call just to be able to say, like, this is the shit ball that landed on my desk today. Have you ever dealt with this? Probably they have, or somebody that has. So get some, build your personal network. That's one of the most important things, because we have to stick together as a community.
I know there's the old saying, your network is your net worth. And I definitely think that in this industry, it's very much about who you know and being able to make sure that you aren't afraid to ask for help, right? I think some people sometimes think of it as a negative, like trying to leverage their relationships. But on the flip side of that, people are very open and welcoming and trying to sort of help other people learn from the same lessons they already got mistakes or learned from mistakes from. So I do think it's important for people to ask. And if you don't ask, you're never going to be able to find out.
And there's huge degrees of difference in that. I mean, this is, it was kind of a joke, but I think one of the things that we learned from people that were, when we launched a show and saying, like, what do you like about this? What don't you like about this? And they're like, people are like, I'm tired of people coming up to me that have never done anything in the cannabis industry and saying, can I pick your brain for an hour or two? I'm thinking of getting in the cannabis industry. And I think we all come from a place of compassion and wanting to help. But at some point you're just like, no, I don't have time. Like, I can't possibly imbue or chew on you, like, the amount of knowledge and challenges that you're going to face in this industry. It's like, you don't know how hard it is to raise a child until you're done with the 18th year. And you're in, you've got the little ones now. I will tell you, high school sucks. Like, when they're in high school, forget about it. You're screwed.
Looking forward to it with two girls too, as well. So yeah, I get it. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. I think that's really great advice as well. Is like there's a lot of ways for you to get in and not have to always do the typical pick your brain thing. Like just start coming to shows, right? There's so much stuff that you can start to pick up on, and then
So much
start
knowledge out
pulling
there.
it pulling at threads, right? Like there's so many opportunities to learn what you don't know. Before we end up wrapping up, George, I want to also sort of just pivot and talk specifically about the event coming up in April. Do you mind telling us the dates, how people can find more information about the show? I'm pumped about coming, but how can other people come join us?
So www, which dates me as a Gen Xer, MJUnpacked.com. If you go on that site, we've got information on, booking your hotel, the agenda, registration, everything else. Attendance is exclusive to people that are licensed operators in the space or accredited investors. If you're a supplier in the industry and you miss the opportunity to exhibit or sponsor our event, we're sorry, but we want to keep this event, kind of intact. And it's really about kind of putting our arms around that group. We always like to kind of keep things fun and fresh. As you know, we brought a gong into our show the first year, and it's kind of become a little bit of a symbol of our event where, when somebody gets a deal done, they bang the gong and everybody like kind of cheers like they're at a bullfight.
It was active last show I was at too. Very active.
It was fun. Then there's always the exhibitors that complain that they're too close to the gong, but try to make everybody happy. And we always try to bring some new stuff. Now, in the last show, we did have a mechanical bull on the show floor. That was not what we had hoped for. There was a company that was commissioning a mechanical blunt. So we were going to actually have this in the middle of the show floor where people could ride the blunt and, use that for social media or whatever. We've had oxygen bars, a bunch of different stuff that we kind of create just to kind of, take the edge off and create some fun experiences for people. The show starts on Wednesday, April 26th. We have two distinct tracks. We have our main conference program that is a slight upcharge that really just helps us cover the cost of the lunch that day. That is focused on the licensed operators. Then we also have a separate investor-only program going on at the same time, which is our Venture Summit, while the exhibit hall gets set up. Both of those feed into the exhibit hall for an opening night reception. And then the second and third days, we have, mainly focused on our exhibit hall and the vendors that are available, the brands that are exhibiting. But we have a number of breakout sessions. We're doing some Ask Me Anything expert-led decisions. So for example, we have one that's on 280 and tax accounting. So we've got some amazing accountants that are going to be in the room, and anybody can go in and get free advice and kind of ask those questions, especially if you're starting out, that you might have some concerns on. We're also doing some tech demos this year. So, as New York's an earlier stage market, there's a need for a lot of POS and other technology solutions that can help them operate their businesses more efficiently. And then, there's 20 groups or so that are all throwing after parties after our show. We'll push a list out to all our registered attendees before the event. And, it's part of the event experience of going out and having fun and letting your hair down. And as I said before, pass the Dutchie.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate the partnership with MCBA. Looking forward to getting out there and checking out the show again. I hope other people go to MJUnpacked.com. We'll be sure to drop a link in the show notes on YouTube and in the podcast and on LinkedIn so people can click and make sure that if they are a licensed brand, they can come on through. Have you guys announced the next show after New York?
Yeah, we actually did. We haven't formally pushed it out, but so I guess this is kind of, you heard it here first, maybe. But we feel that most of the industry is a little bit tired of Las Vegas. It's not a very drivable market other than from Southern California. And I think that the West Coast is under a lot more duress financially than the East Coast markets. And so we did some analysis, and we're going to bring our fall show into Detroit. We think that, Detroit's still a growing market. There is a little bit of oversupply and price compression, but neighbors, Ohio, Illinois, Missouri and Oklahoma are not far. And Minnesota's, certainly doing some exciting things there as well. So we'll probably rotate that fall show around for a couple of years. We've got some plans for 2024 and 2025, be announced at the right time. But we'll be back in New York again the following spring. And we, feel that New York is going to be, our anchor event, and we'll continue to grow that market there.
Well, that's going to be super exciting, both for this upcoming New York event, but then going back to Detroit. I haven't been back to Michigan in several years, so it's going to be awesome to sort of see the marketplace now that it's up and running, and really be able to see not only just Michigan, but other, as you said, nearby states who are all looking to start figuring out how they can really start to have a footprint.
Well, and Buddy's Pizza, which is the original place where the Detroit pizza came out of. When you're there, that's really good, by the way, after you smoke up. But that actually, I learned something when I was out in Detroit, that when they started making those kind of square pizzas, like deep dish pizzas, kind of heavy bread with stuff on top of it, was because the automotive industry, they were basically making the pizza trays from the automotive plants by pressing out oil pans so they could make the pizzas.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. I would have never known that. And I definitely want to check out some buddies while I'm in town when that happens. Do you have dates already set for Michigan?
October 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Cool. Awesome. Right after my birthday. Looking forward to it. Well, George, I really appreciate you joining us on CannabisCMO, man. Like I said, I've really appreciated the friendship over the years. Really love watching MJUnpacked grow. Looking forward to seeing these future shows. And, please feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do at CannabisCMO. And for now, everybody make sure you go into MJUnpacked.com. Make sure you're also subscribing to our newsletter at CannabisCMO.substack.com. We'll see you next time on another episode of CannabisCMO. Aloha.
Thanks, Kaliko.
Thank you.